Thank you very much. Okay, so Humanity Plus. It's got something to do with transhumanism, I think. Everybody knows what that is, right? Everybody's perfectly clear. If I call on you, you can come down and give me a 10-second definition, I'm sure. Okay. Well, some of you can, some of you may not. Since this is the first transhumanist conference in Hong Kong, perhaps it's good to have a talk that actually focuses on transhumanism as such. Because transhumanism has become quite a complicated idea, movement, philosophy. There's a whole bunch of things. What is it? Is it all about life extension? Is it about playing video games all the time?
Yeah.
The world is a video game, right? We're all in the Matrix.
No, wait, that's my talk.
So about robots. It's all about technology. It's all about philosophy. Well, there's all these different ideas. We've heard all these different talks, and they're all bits and pieces. They've all got something to do with transhumanism, but perhaps you're not entirely clear what. If you don't have a good idea of the history of transhumanism and the whole philosophy, you may be feeling a little bit confused. Okay, we've heard interesting talks about genes and life extension research and this and that, but how does that all fit together into transhumanism? What is this clumsy, long, strange word? Well, that's a good question. That's why, actually, one of our next speakers, Natasha Vita-Moore, and myself are producing this book, The Transhumanist Reader, which will be out next year sometime. And that is an attempt to answer this question in no less than 460 pages. So it's nice light reading. You can give that to anybody and say, just read through this quickly, you'll get a good idea. And in putting that book together, we realized that to really give a comprehensive idea of transhumanism as it has come to exist, its whole history, coming to the present, and its current condition, and all its different flavors, that would take a fairly substantial volume. And in fact, we had to organize it into 9 different sections just to fit even a reasonable selection of everything in there. So it's really not complete. So we have, for instance, one of our, I guess section number 2 is on the somatic sphere, all about the body, because transhumanists are very interested in improving their bodies and making them live longer and healthier, upgrading their physical capabilities, tweaking them in various ways, improving our perception, and so on. So that's clearly part of transhumanism, the body. We have another section on the somatic sphere, on the cognitive sphere, because we know that transhumanists are very interested in the brain too, improving our cognitive abilities, improving our memory, our ability to reason well. So that's all part of it. We have a section on core technologies, because clearly transhumanists love technologies. Why? Well, because those are the means that we can become transhuman. We're not going to become transhuman just by sitting down and thinking all day. That may have some useful things to do with our lives, but it's not going to really overcome the limits of our bodies, our genes. It's not going to conquer the aging process. It's not going to make us inherently smarter. So those are important aspects, but technology is not everything. We know that identity issues, life extension issues, all those are important to transhumanists. So is the desire to make better decisions, smarter decisions, especially as we have more powerful technologies, whether those are artificial intelligence, robotics, self-replicating machines of various kinds. Those are radically powerful technologies, and we better know how to make smarter decisions with them. So it's kind of inherent to transhumanism to have better decision making. Then there's a whole range of objections to transhumanism. A lot of arguments in what's now called biopolitics, and people objecting to transhumanism, as Fukuyama did, as the world's most dangerous idea. It was a big favorite calling us the most dangerous idea. So, well, that leaves us still a little bit puzzled as to, well, okay, what is this thing? And in part that's because there are many different flavors. Transhumanists don't all share one political view, they have quite a variety of views. They don't even have an agreed view on religion. Now some of you might think, oh, well, transhumanists are all atheists and agnostics, right? Well, no, actually not. Whether that's essential to transhumanism is a controversial issue, but we know there are, for instance, there's quite strong, vigorous Mormon Transhumanist Association, and you might be surprised by that, but actually they're pretty interesting guys. They're very transhumanist, and they believe they can become God. It's actually quite
and they believe Mormonism is the most transhumanist religion.
It is the most, yeah, the most transhumanist religion. And yet we know there are other transhumanists who, not very many, there are a few who are Christians. Just a couple of days ago I read, and this really kind of surprised me, that Peter Thiel, who's known for supporting various transhumanist causes and technologies, describes himself as a Christian. I went, what? I was really surprised. So, well, there you go. There have been other people in the past who've described themselves that way. There are a number of people who call themselves Buddhists who are transhumanists. So you might go, okay, well that's interesting. I thought transhumanists were all very kind of physicalist, materialist, functionalist types who didn't really believe in that. Well, not necessarily. Are they then not quite fully transhumanist? Well, we won't discuss that right now. It's a complicated question. Then there's a big contrast between those who see transhumanism as purely a philosophy, just a philosophical set of ideas, contrasted with those who see it as a movement to transform the world, transform our societies, our politics, our economics, the whole way we interact with each other. Those, of course, are very important parts of it. But it's also, transhumanism also has an aspect of self-improvement. It's all about improving yourself. I think particularly back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a stronger emphasis on that. But it's still here. We like personally, not just to talk about smart drugs and to make sure they're not regulated out of existence. We want to take smart drugs if they work and if they're safe. We want to get smarter and live longer and be healthier ourselves. So it does have an actual self-improvement, self-maintenance aspect. It doesn't have to. There are certainly plenty of transhumanists who are very unhealthy, don't take care of themselves, don't implement any of those ideas in ways that they still could, because they're relying on more advanced technologies to solve all those problems. Risky strategy. And then there's the whole element of the singularity. I think singularity's had so much publicity now that some people are thinking transhumanism is all about the singularity. Wrong. It's not. And in my view, that's a bit of an unfortunate identification. Singularity views, of course, do have a lot to do with transhumanism. They overlap in many ways in looking at the advance of technologies. But singularitarian views, and they're not just one, of course, there are a whole range, but they tend to have specific views of technological progress, how that will happen, how fast it will happen, at an exponential or double exponential rate due to certain specific mechanisms. And you can be a transhumanist without really necessarily believing any of those things will happen. You might think that technology speeds up and slows down, that some technologies go faster than others, that they go, adoption curves flatten out and then we pick up again. You may not believe in a singularity. You probably agree that over a long period of time we will see drastic changes to the human condition. We won't necessarily accept a specific singularity model of that. Then there's a whole growing range of differences among transhumanists on an ethical basis, or a meta-ethical basis more properly. Some transhumanists are very interested in philosophical questions and ethical questions, but many of us are. And on what basis? Do we believe that morality is completely arbitrary? If we're recommending that people adopt certain enhancements as being good for you, good for other people, on what basis do we make those declarations? Well, some of us, there aren't very many deontological transhumanists as far as I can tell. The three big schools of meta-ethics are the deontologists, represented by Immanuel Kant, who essentially believes that morality is about laws and rules, in the very simplest forms, such as the Ten Commandments, but they can be derived in more sophisticated forms. They basically say what you must not do, what's right and wrong. I don't think there are many people like that except when we talk about rights, which tend to be deontological and it doesn't really matter what the consequences are. Then there's a whole other big group of transhumanists that seems very popular who are utilitarians. And you might get the impression that that is the standard view in transhumanism. Utilitarians being essentially a subset of consequentialists, those who think that the right action is the one that produces the best consequences, which in the simplest form is based on hedonism, minimizing the amount of suffering, maximizing the amount of feeling good in the world. And you might assume that that's a general view, but it's not. I'm not a utilitarian, for instance, and there are quite a few other people who look to other versions of transhumanism, especially if they're sympathetic to certain aspects of Nietzsche's work, which is definitely a virtue-based approach. It's all about becoming a better kind of person. And that certainly brings in aspects of rule-based reasoning, and it certainly brings in consequences, but those are not the be-all and end-all. I'll talk a little bit more about that. These perspectives are not just variations in transhumanism, they're not just different kinds of transhumanism. They have some inherent biases and tendencies which I think we need to be aware of. If we're going to maintain transhumanism in some kind of fairly clear form while allowing all this great diversity, it's a good idea to understand what's essential, what's not, where we can vary, and where certain differences may actually lead us in certain directions if we don't keep an eye out. So I think these perspectives do have power. Utilitarianism, for instance, is all about calculating the right action based on consequences. And that assumes, first of all, that you can calculate the consequences of your actions in some kind of fairly clear fashion. So it assumes that actions are calculable, right or wrong is calculable, that you can sum together the subjective states of being of everybody who your actions might affect, and then add those up and choose the right action. You want to maximize those outcomes. And I think that tends to bias our reasoning towards things that we can actually calculate and foresee and measure and quantify. It tends to reduce our reasoning to what is known. It tends to be a little bit closed to possibilities, because how do you calculate possibilities? You can say, okay, this new technology might open up these new opportunities and possibilities, but how do you actually weigh those and calculate them? It might be easier to weigh the downsides and dangers. You might be able to say, well, this could kill a certain number of people. But if you have no idea what the upsides are, you may start to be biased towards resisting that technology or over-regulating it, which of course can have its own costs. It also tends to weigh, well, it necessarily weighs, at least in the hedonistic version, utilitarianism weighs sentience, not sapience. Sentience essentially feelings, how someone feels, you feel good or bad. Now in a virtue-based approach, that could lead to quite different results, because you might be willing to put up with some unpleasant states of mind in order to achieve something you consider virtuous. But on a utilitarian view, that wouldn't really be a legitimate process. So you might consider, for instance, that you would rather give up some pleasures right now if it will produce, if it will let you live long enough to achieve a higher state of awareness, better brain, better thinking, where you're at a higher level of sapience. You might think that's more worthwhile. It's worth the pain and suffering. Even if you don't feel especially better at that higher level, you may consider that more valuable. There's another big change in emphasis over the years. Back in the early days, transhumanism was very much about the positive. It was all about, I mean, it's partly because of a reaction to the culture around it, right? The culture since the 70s especially, certainly in England, and I think over here as well, the culture since the 70s, maybe even late 60s, has been very pessimistic. It's been one of aversion to risk. It's been one of saying that human beings are the problem, and the planet is what's good, we're just parasites, we're doing all this damage, we're awful human beings, we should be ashamed of ourselves, we should shrink our carbon footprint, we should apologize to Mother Nature, get down on our knees and grovel and beg forgiveness. It's kind of the view that we're basically bad and we shouldn't be pushing ahead, we should be reining in those risks. And I think, transhumanism, as it started off, rebelled against that. Basically it said, I'm going to give you the finger on that attitude, we're going to progress, we're going to move forward, we have these opportunities that we can see. And back then a lot of people thought these were very science fictional, a lot of the things we talked about, from brain-computer interfaces to life extension, on and on. Now they don't. Now you can read any popular magazine, they're discussing these ideas very seriously. We had to say, well, not only are they possible, but they're pretty good overall. Yeah, they might bring up some problems, but basically they're a good idea. We should be pursuing these. So I think it's natural that over time, as we engaged a little differently with other people and other views, we weren't such a small subculture, and we had to deal with some more specific issues about how do we regulate these things, how do we make the best decisions, how do we allay people's concerns, otherwise they're not going to let us do these things. We had to start being a little more balanced in our treatment. As other people became more open and therefore a little more balanced to our ideas, we didn't have to be quite so pushy about the positive aspects. So we started to acknowledge that there are downsides, there are possibilities of, maybe there are runaway nanotechnology possibilities, maybe AI can become very powerful and not have our interests at heart. But to me, there's been a little bit of an overstepping in that area, which worries me a little bit. I think there's been so much focus on what's the very sexy idea of what's sometimes called existential risks, or which I prefer to call extinction risks, because existential to me is all about existentialism and what's the meaning of my life, so I can't see that as a risk. It's extinction risk. It's about the danger of destroying our entire biosphere, our entire, at least all of human beings. That's all living beings. That's a really sexy idea, so it's great to talk about that. It's very fun to focus on, gets you lots of attention. But from a transhumanist point of view, yes, that's worth paying attention to, because that's a possibility, right? We've had that worry for a long time. But we've got to be careful about over-focusing on that, because we're liable to find that people will react to that and try and stop us doing anything positive. And I can guarantee, if we don't pursue these technologies, especially fundamentally life extension technology, we will all go extinct anyway. One by one, not all at once, but individually we will go extinct. So fundamentally we've got to keep these technologies moving forward. Now I don't dismiss all these risks. I've been very aware of risks since I was pretty young. When I was growing up in England in the 60s and 70s, people were terrified of nuclear warfare. I was terrified of nuclear warfare. That was the thing every young person was afraid of being nuked to death. We all read those scary books, we all watched those videos at school. Those usually rather dishonest ones, actually, like Helen Caldicott, who showed the effects of dropping a nuclear bomb on a nuclear power plant, which is a very strange idea to demonstrate how bad nuclear power is. But yeah, we scared the hell out of us. I remember sitting in an English class, I was probably about 13 or 14, and someone had recently made some kind of forecast that the end of the world was very near because of nuclear conflict, and it could happen without any warning because these automatic systems would go wrong. We were sitting in the class right around the day this was supposed to happen, and some kind of plane flew overhead, making this loud roaring sound. We kind of went, oh shit. This is the time. So I've been aware of these risks, because there are real risks of extinction. But if we go too far in that direction, again, we're going to go individually extinct. So let's not overdo it. So yeah, caution is good, but be cautious of caution. It's kind of a paradoxical thing. Too much caution will kill you. Now, there are already plenty of groups out there who are going to urge caution. The bioconservatives, various environmentalist groups, all kinds of people. Those who worry about globalization will put restrictions in various ways too. There's a huge alliance of different types of people with different interests, all of whom have an interest in restricting progress. And I include in that, by the way, many large corporations who want progress as long as it's on their terms. And if they can lobby governments to restrict other businesses from competing with them and allowing that kind of progress, they will do so. So they'll sound like they're in favor of progress, but as long as it's their kind of progress. So there are many, many different groups who don't seem to have much in common, except they want to restrict progress. And why is that? Because progress breaks down established orders and structures. Progress changes things. New technologies disrupt old industries. They can even disrupt whole societies and governments. And so it's not really surprising that this produces an alliance between some strange partners. You can see some very conservative people getting together with some deep ecologists, all to restrict certain kinds of technological development, material progress. So be cautious of caution. Or there's a Chrissy Hynde song, I think, I don't know which one it was, but I particularly like this one. I have to dig it out and download it, where she's singing, "Just Stop Stopping." And I think that's a good idea. We've got to stop stopping quite so much. We need to make strong, vigorous progress. We should still worry about these things, downsides and side effects of technologies, but let's maintain the essence of transhumanism, which to me reflects a few fundamental ideas. And progress is one of those. When I wrote The Principles of Extropy, which has gone through various different versions, one aspect of that, in the most recent version, I call that perpetual progress. That, I think, is a fundamental aspect of transhumanism that distinguishes it from other philosophies and worldviews. It's something we inherited from Enlightenment humanism. It's one of the good parts of that. It has its downsides. But it was the realization, coming out of the Middle Ages, there was this idea that we don't really make progress. Things stay the same. Certainly in the Western world, it's different in China for quite a while, but in the Western world, not much happened for about 1,000 years. There was very, very minor progress. People were very unhealthy, they died early, and you could go through generations and generations without seeing much progress. So this idea of progress is a fairly recent one, and it's not inevitable. That's another reason that I'm a little bit unhappy with the dominance of the singularity idea, because to me the singularity view either they will say no, I'm not saying that, they'll deny it to the end, but you look at it, it's very much suggestive of this inevitable progress, and progress is not inevitable. So one aspect of transhumanism that's critical is progress, and its vigorous, unapologetic pursuit. Another aspect, I think, that goes along with that is what I've described as dynamic optimism or active optimism, the idea that we can make our lives better, we can improve the world, but only if we make an effort. It's not going to happen by praying to some higher power or just by wishing for it. Optimism is only rational if you work towards it sensibly. And so another core aspect of progress, optimism of a sensible kind, another core aspect of transhumanism, which I hope will not ever be lost, is rationality. Using our reason, not relying on wishes or feelings, or the most dangerous area, of course, is authority figures, because there's no clear boundary between what's rational in terms of listening to authority figures, people who seem to know better than you, and taking that too far. So it's a very tricky area. I don't see too much of a problem with that in transhumanism right now, but that's one area to watch out for. The rise of taking gurus too seriously, and not being willing to listen to countervailing and contradictory voices. So really that's my message, is that yeah, it's very, very confusing sometimes. You look at all these different parts of transhumanism, all these different technologies, all these different interests, but there are some fundamental things which I think we should pay attention to, and that's what really I think we'll have in common, and not to be seduced by the dark side of some of these things, not to get not to become Pollyanna optimists, not to focus too much on downside risks in a way that will actually stop all progress. So stay positive. Thank you very much.